women who gave the creep a chance. How did it go? After a few dates he started to get way too serious. I told him calmly and honestly that I wasn't ready for a serious relationship and he deserved to be with someone who was. He completely flipped, and after a bit of name calling I stood up and started to leave the bar. He then said you should watch yourself in the future, especially when getting into your car. I was extremely paranoid for months after, would check my backseat and under my vehicle. Never saw him again, so just an empty threat, but not a fun time. That was like 15 years ago. Yeah, he's still single. At the end of a weird and terrible date, he asked me for a hug as I was turning to leave. I thought, whatever gets this over with. As I was pulling away, he forcibly grabbed the back of my head and shoved his tongue in my mouth before I was able to break free. The next morning I had a 3-page email in my inbox telling me all the things that are wrong with me and why he is not interested in a second date. I had a bad vibe, but my friend told me he was a good guy. So we went on a date and he asked to drive my car. He curbed my rims and talked about how he was fired unfairly from his job. The next weekend I avoided his calls and instead went out to dinner with friends. While I was gone, he broke into my apartment. My neighbors and the cops were waiting outside. When I got home, I spent the night at my mom's. He showed up at 0300 when the mail let him out and was trying to get in a window. Wonderful officer spent the rest of the night in the driveway. Fast forward a couple weeks and he shows up at my work, mopes over to me and hands me folded papers. It was 8 to 10 handwritten front and back notebook papers where he alternated between telling me I was the love of his life to why he hated me and wished I would die. I was terrified. Security escorted him away. Never saw him again, but found out later he did the same thing to some girl in Spokane. But he was able to actually get in, beat her and landed her in the hospital. And for everyone asking, the friend was dating my best friend and the good guy was his cousin. I think he really wanted us to hit it off so the four of us could all hang out together or something. He was shocked by the actions of his cousin, but did tell me later that he had thought he changed. They are not longer dating and haven't talked to him in years and years. This happened 20 years ago in the PNW. Met him when I worked as a cashier in a small downtown shop. Wasn't my type and seemed a little off, but I was young and had zero real dating experience. Agreed to grab coffee as a friend and made it clear I didn't have a romantic interest. He became convinced he was Gatsby and I was his Daisy. The Great Gatsby film had just come out that year. Started stalking me and endlessly sending letters and gifts to me at work describing how we were fated to be together. When I confronted him to stop, he started having his friends follow me at work or drop by to check in on me. Prowled outside on nights I had to close shop alone. I ended up quitting that job and things fizzled. 7 months later I got a call from a number one didn't recognize. It was the same dude. He just got released from a short prison sentence and was letting me know he thought of me every day and was going to find me so we could finally be together. I made up a story that I was traveling abroad for college and would be gone indefinitely. Changed my number and luckily haven't heard from him again. I'll give the rare success story. Not with me, but it's not as bad as the others. He was sort of creepy and weird and neck buddy. We hung out and sort of flirted because I didn't want to be seen as shallow and didn't know how to hold boundaries, but I wasn't really interested. I eventually just sort of stopped giving him attention and giving off signals. Apparently he made a couple snide comments to people we both knew about how I don't date monogamous people. Anyway, which is a mean thing to say. A few years later I saw him at a con and he waved me down and I was nervous, but he was like, hey, I wanted to apologize. I was a real prick to you, to your friends. I've done a lot of work on myself and realized that women not liking me isn't a them problem. It's a me problem. I forgave him and we hung out a couple times after that at cons. Hence, good guy. Just had been going through a cringy phase. This guy was handsome, but way too into me for knowing nothing about me. It wasn't like when we spoke I was an open book or felt a strong connection that would lead me to want to share info with him. This was not a I feel like I've known this man forever connection. I just thought this was normal dating, but had a gut feeling something was off. Talked to me like I'd been his girlfriend for months. We went on 3 dates, never even had been intimate. After third date I had made my decision. based on our short time getting to know one another, and let him know I had no interest in continuing to date and that I didn't see us being compatible long term. He then locked me in his car, proceeded to ask if I wanted to move to California with him, WTF, and started crying/begging me to work this out. I tried to be very nice, but it got to the point I was scared and wasn't sure how this was going to go since he was virtually a stranger. So I hit his dashboard and said if he didn't let me out of the car immediately I was calling the police. Then he threatened to kill himself if I didn't spend the night with him at his house. I'd never even been to this man's house. He finally let me out after like an hour or two, but stayed in the parking lot of my apartment almost the entire night and called me non-stop. About a month later he texted me out of the blue a really long paragraph apologizing profusely and saying if I ever change my mind to call him. I just said thanks for the apology and wished him well. Hope he's doing okay, but I wanted no part of that. The dude in the flat across from mine started off as a really nice guy, introduced himself, offered meals when he'd cooked too much, just a great guy all round. Within a few weeks, it was made clear that he was an alcoholic. I have a recovering brother, so I really sympathized with him. I went out of my way to sit with him and eventually called him an ambulance when he fitted from withdrawals, UK. So calling an ambulance is free. This carried on for a little while, with me sitting with him 2 or 3 times a week, waiting for an ambulance. One night after he started fitting, he kept grabbing my breasts. I was already on the phone to the ambulance service, but the woman heard me telling him to stop and sent police as well. He was carted off, and just like usual, I grabbed his keys and told him to knock for them the next morning. Well, the NRXT time I looked after him, the groping got worse, and then slowly so did my life. Suddenly I had fires set outside my windows, and mutilated rat corpses left on my doorstep. The police were called after every incident, and I got to know one policeman who was put on my case really well. He suggested I put up cameras, so I did. There was footage of the neighbor standing outside in the yard at 3 AM, just staring into my window, multiple nights in a row. Terrifying, but not illegal. Well, 2 weeks after that, my neighbor snapped. There were builders in the garden next to ours, and they apparently woke him up at 4 PM. He ran out with a kitchen knife and stabbed 2 of the builders and the neighbor's dog. Everyone survived. He also slashed a whole bunch of tires on our street. When the police came to search the dude's flat, my policeman friend told me, off the books, that the neighbor had been faking being an alcoholic the entire time. He'd get in the ambulance, ride to the hospital, and then check himself out and walk home. Also, they found half a dozen decomposing rats in his bathtub. They'd been mutilated. They later found a bloody hammer under his bed. You'd think him being arrested would be the end of it, but no. He put my name, picture, address, and telephone number on a prostitution site. I had men aggressively hounding me for intimacy multiple times an hour for 2 entire weeks, before I just cut all ties and fled the city. Last I heard, he was in jail for the GBH. But that was a few years ago now. Yeah, never gonna make the same mistake again. On our first date I ordered a beer. It came to the table super frothy. I was distracted for a moment, but when I looked at it again there were very clear drip marks in the foam like something had been dropped in it. I made up some excuse about not feeling well and got out of there. Oops, can't leave. My dumb ass drove and my car was valeted. I, very uncomfortably, got the car from valet and we both got in. He asked me to stop at a gas station so he could buy smokes on the way. Thank God, because I knew going to his house was not a good idea. As soon as he got out at the station I peeled out and left him there. I never should have let him in my car, but I panicked. I didn't know what he was capable of. This was 15 plus years ago. I'm now happily married to the best thing that ever happened to me. Back in high school several of my female friends and I, also female, had an off period before lunch, so we were all sitting around a table chatting. One of the female security guards came up to us and told me that there was a new exchange student from Amsterdam that thought I was cute, but he was too nervous to come over and introduce himself. I have zero interest in men, but I figured there wasn't any harm in letting the guy come sit with us and helping him feel more comfortable at our school. So he comes over, sits down with us, and chats a bit. He seemed rather shy and he had about a dozen piercings going up each arm that he kept fiddling with and a bunch of facial piercings. Then class lets out and people, including a bunch of my male friends, start showing up for lunch. First male friend sits down and introduces himself. New guy doesn't not respond at all. Doesn't even look at friend. Weird. Maybe just shy. Second male friend comes and sits down. Same thing. Slightly unsettling now. We kept trying to include him over lunch, but he would only respond to the women. Wouldn't even acknowledge the other guys at the table. I never talked to him again after that lunch period, and 2 weeks later he got expelled for slamming a girl against a locker and choking her to the point she nearly passed out. A few years ago, I went to a brewery to meet a guy on a date for the first time. The waiter began a conversation and asked me if I was expecting anyone else. I told him I was on a blind date and hadn't met the guy before. The waiter asked me if I wanted to set up a code word since they didn't serve milk stouts. If I ordered one from him, he would know something is up and would call me back to have me sign the receipt instead. The waiter kept checking on me frequently. Eventually, I did order a milk stout. When it came time for the bill, I asked for it to be split. My date put his drinks on my bill. When the waiter came back, he told me he had the drinks removed. It was on the house. When my date asked me what that was all about, I told him the waiter had told me there was something wrong with my card, so I needed to go to bar with him. I waited a while and then left for my car. The date was still there. He made a comment about how he was waiting for a goodbye hug. I told him, no thank you, and that my car was in the opposite direction. Moments later, he sent me horrendous text messages and thank you, John, you may have saved my life that day. He had terrible hygiene. I was 16. He was old enough to buy beer for my friends. He had a friend who had some sort of made up gang who threatened to kill me if I ever left him. I stayed with him longer than I should have. He would follow me to school on the city bus and then walk around leering at women and pinching his nipples. I tried to break up with him and he bought me Looney Tunes jewelry and insisted we were engaged. He finally had to go out of town for some family stuff and stayed gone for months. So I considered us broken up and I moved on. When he came back, he acted crazy. He would go to my job and follow me around and try to corner me in the bathroom. His dad was the chief of police at a university and knew I was 16. My parents also knew about the relationship. I feel like some parents should have intervened to keep me from feeling trapped in that relationship. I was in high school, my senior year, and I thought to befriend this weird kid at lunch. He was your textbook greasy outcast with a leather jacket and headphones on way too loud. I was an offbeat art kid, but generally well liked and surprisingly well remembered even after almost 20 years post-graduation. My friends ran the gamut of high school social classes, so they gave this dude a chance because I gave him a chance. My friends were not forgiving and quickly tuned into just how creepy he could be. They soon stopped entertaining him and split off to a different table. I tried to balance time between him and the larger group, but as the year progressed, I became more enmeshed with the larger group. As our final classes and assignments overlapped a great deal, many of us were in the same app and extracurricular activities. I tried to keep up chatting with him in the hallways, but he either wouldn't really respond or was short with me. I figured he was hurt over lunch not working out anymore, so I gave him space. He did not take it well. I was at my locker one day, swapping things out for the back half of the day, when he stormed up. He had a glass bottle of Coca-Cola with him. I remember it because he liked to chew tobacco and spit it into the same bottle he would drink from. I'd asked about it once, and he said, what does it matter? It's all going in the same place, and took a swig. He had that glass bottle in his hand, and he looked livid. He saw me. He chucked the bottle in my direction, and it exploded on the floor. He started screaming at me about how awful I was, and how I was a betrayer, and stuck up like all my perfect friends. He got right up in my face and I just felt like shrinking into the floor. He banged on the lockers, making them rattle. The track coach had been down the hall and jogged over to interrupt. This guy said I'd better watch my back and stormed off. I spent the rest of senior year feeling paranoid. I would see him in the hall and would go a different direction to get to class instead. I vaguely remember seeing him at graduation, but haven't seen him since. I live in the same greater metro area. I don't give creepy dudes chances anymore. Once was enough. I bought him a coffee one time and we chatted about our music tastes. 3 days later, I was sitting in my dorm and I got a text from him that was just a selfie. I sent one back and the conversation got really boring. So I sent him a snap of a black screen. He responded, "Are you in a dark place?" And I said, "Yeah lol." His response was, "Well, you'll have to leave soon because you have class in insert building with insert professor at 6 o'clock. I literally never told him anything about my classes, so he just stalked me until he learned my entire schedule. It turns out he was a serial creep preying on freshman girls.